Hi, everyone. This is the acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. Happy Friday, everybody. Today, we are going to take a look at the entrance of the sun into Pisces, talk a little bit about the fishes and what you can expect from not only the sun entering Pisces, but a big lineup of planets that are going to eventually end up in Pisces in the month ahead. Before I do that, I have a little kind of a special announcement that I'm going to make, which I'm really excited about. So, most of you probably know that ancient Hellenistic astrology has experienced a rebirth or a revival in the modern era, thanks to, in large part, a project that got started in the 1990s called Project Hindsight. People know the work of Robert Schmidt, Robert Hand, and Robert Zoller, and these um, basically astrologers slash philosophers and translators who got together and were translating ancient astrology texts and recovering and trying to restore a lot of the ancient doctrines and practices of astrology. And this is in large part what and there were other translators too, like James Holden, he's a famous one, but the translation work that these astrologers did, especially the work of Robert Schmidt, inspired a whole generation of astrologers to begin practicing Hellenistic astrology. So Bob died a few years ago. I happened to have been going over to visit Bob when he died. I was going to go and talk to him, and occasionally I did that because I didn't live very far from him. So I had a few times where I went over and spent time with him and kind of got to know him and learn about astrology from him. Not like people who spent a lot of time with him. Of course, I had very little time, relatively speaking, and didn't know him very well. But in the small time that I did spend with him, I was very inspired. I ended up purchasing basically his whole audio library and listening to it, and really had an impact on how I practice and think about astrology, as it did on many other people. Had a big impact on many other people too. For example, people who spent a lot of time at Project Hindsight, whose work was inspired or influenced by the time that they spent there with all of these great astrological minds. People like Demetra George and Chris Brennan. I think Austin Coppock spent a little bit of time there, Nick Dagan Bess, Patrick Watson. There was a lot of people who were, hanging out there and getting really excited about the revival of these ancient teachings. Now, I came on the late end of all of this and got to know Bob basically as he was dying. And I went over there one day to visit with him and knocked on the door. Nobody was there. And so I called their cell phone, and it turns out that he had just had a stroke and was in the hospital. I went over to the hospital and spent some time with him, right before he passed, and then was at his funeral as well. And so I got to know some of the people who were closer to him a little bit. I had first heard of his work through taking Chris Brennan's Hellenistic astrology course. And so at any rate, it was kind of a tragic loss. And since then, I know that, his wife and kind of the community around him had been working on trying to develop a website where the archives of his lectures that span hundreds and hundreds of hours could be made available to the public. And so they released they launched the website, Robert Schmidt Astrology website, where all of his talks are now available. At least the first dump of 205 hours worth of them are available, if you can imagine that amount of lecture content. And they're on a subscription plan. So you can sign up for a monthly plan or a yearly plan and have unlimited access to all of the talks. And they're going to be dumping more in the months to come. And the idea is that eventually everything that will be entirely on the website. But 205 for the first dump is pretty good. There's some introductory talks that are free too, that you can just get like a taste for it. So if you want to check that out, if you're someone who's into Hellenistic astrology, maybe you've heard his name, you've heard about these talks, you're going to get a range of talks that were happening at Project Hindsight and just get a feel for what it was like to be there. I recommend it from a historical standpoint. If you're into Hellenistic astrology, it's just cool to know what it was like, and what Bob was like and so forth, what the mood and atmosphere was like. I think it's cool to just take that in and feel it for yourself. I will say about Bob that as a thinker and as an astrologer, I found his lectures, listening to them, to be deeply inspiring, and talking to him in person. You know, what I tell people is, uh, Bob was a trailblazer of kinds, and you may not like, his work, or you may not agree with everything that he says. And I certainly wish that I could still have some, like maybe there's a few spaces, or I'd be like, it would be interesting to see some debates that he can't have now, that he's gone. Um, but purely from a historical standpoint, taking in the talks and considering them, and just working with being there sort of at the ground where a lot of this entire practice came up, is to me really historically valuable. So that's why I've decided to promote it. And I also have agreed to be an affiliate, which means that, like, I'm going to put a link in the box. Anytime I share a link, I get a small percentage of the sales from any of them. I want to be just transparent about that. I know that's pretty common these days, that there's things called affiliate links. And what I've decided to do with any revenue that comes in through that affiliate link, at least in 2021, my goal for this year is to expand and develop my research library, which I know is something that Bob would have liked. He was always, every time I talked to him, he was asking me what I was reading. He was asking me where my studies were going. He was a perpetual student. And so I thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm not trying to bank off it. I'm going to do it to try and develop something or build something that I think Bob would have appreciated. So I'll use anything that I earn to develop my research library on astrology, philosophy, stuff like that. So anyway, I hope you enjoy them. If you do, check it out. The lectures that I recommend the most from the phase series, this is the 205 hours, how we aim our minds, which is a talk about intentionality and philosophy involving intentionality and the practice of astrology, which is really, really interesting. He has another one called The Same and the Other, which looks really at some of the philosophical underpinnings of ancient astrology. Being in the Zodiac is another really good one. Fate, Allotment, and Decree gets into the Greek notions of fate that would have been around in the ancient Hellenistic world. Astrology and the Fields of Consciousness. Some of his talks, he was quite a philosopher. Some of them are quite deep. That's a good one, though. On Celestial Grammar, Part 1, Logos, and Part 2, Phasis. Those are fantastic. Some of my favorite talks that he ever did. He also has one called How Astrology Works, 4 Hypotheses. I found that these were pretty interesting. They're philosophically dense. And then there's one called Transcendence and the Outer Planets. And I like this. This was where he was kind of speculating about what the outer planets might mean in light of, all of the work that they were doing in ancient astrology and philosophy. So those are some of my favorite talks from the series, talks that I've listened to over and over again and found a lot of value in. And I certainly think that you guys might enjoy them as well. So at any rate, I'm excited to share that. I've been hoping eventually that his talks would find their way into an archive or something like this. And there is a third party that's handling all of the business on the site and the uploads and stuff like that. So this is someone who came in to try to help set this up, because this is not obviously something that was going to be tricky for Bob's wife on her own now to do. So a group of friends got this together for them, as I understand it. And I've been in contact with the people managing the site, and they're really nice and eager to, help people hear what he had to say while he was with us. So at any rate, that's what I've got. Now let's talk about the Pisces and the fish. So I've put the chart up on the screen right now so you can see it. You're going to notice that the sun has just ingressed into Pisces. And I just want to show you where this is going in the weeks ahead. So if we go forward a few days, you're going to notice that, first of all, Venus pops into Pisces. One of the things that is unique about this Venus transit is that Venus is going to be in her exaltation, and that is a form of protection from the combustion that Venus is going through with the sun. That's nice, because Venus combust, Venus things can really take a hit. We've also got Mars in Venus's sign right now. So some of this is going to calm down pretty quickly. If you've been experiencing, the Venus-Mars tension that's sort of in the air right now, you're going to notice that starts to calm down by the end of next week. Even you can go a little bit further than that, and you're going to see Mars finally get out of Taurus and into Gemini. At which point there's less sort of conflict around Venus because Mars is literally out of Venus's sign. Then what you're going to notice is this huge stellium that starts coming through. You're going to have, let's put in Neptune here so you can see this new moon that's going to come through. Check this out. So let's just move this along a little bit. So here's a new moon that comes through around March 12th. And look at that. It's just Venus, Neptune, the sun and moon all sandwiched together. That's a huge new moon with a very strong Neptunian flavor. So we're starting to turn from a pretty heavy Saturn Aquarius emphasis, and that's going to start dying down into the spring as we get this big Pisces push. That's actually followed, of course, by Mercury entering Pisces. And then if you flash forward a few weeks later, you're also going to notice that by about middle of May, Jupiter will head into Pisces. And then Saturn is the only planet left in Aquarius. Now, the only reason I'm mentioning all of this is just to give you a feeling how everything is really going to shift to Pisces. There's a lot of emphasis on Pisces in March that will span all the way through the middle of May when Jupiter gets into Pisces. So I figured it was worth it to take a moment to sort of pause and go like, what are the fish about? So one of the constellation images that I really love shows the two fish, their tails tied together. One is swimming upward and eastward, the other one downward and westward. And this is a really good like visual representation of Pisces and the archetype or the mythos that's at the core of Pisces. So you have the upward and eastward movement, which is the movement of spirit, of transcendence. And then you have the downward and westward movement, which is toward embodiment or toward the physical or the material, toward incarnation, toward matter, towards immanence or toward embodiment. So these two different impulses are represented by two fish swimming in opposite directions with their tails are tied together. They can't separate from each other. And there's something about this that is a part of the quintessential meaning of the sign of Pisces, that we are immortal, eternal spirit souls who are always looking for our eternal home. And yet, as so many traditions tell us, here we are pinned to the wheel of fortune, continually taking a new body, a new birth. Even in one lifetime, forget about the huge metaphysical picture of rebirth and so forth. Just think about within this lifetime. We're always seeking for that thing that will satisfy us, that will bring our heart it brings our heart and mind to rest. One thing that I remember from another talk that Bob gave one time called Image and the Original, which was another really great talk. But, he talked a lot about how the zodiac as a contemplative, almost like a contemplative tool, that the images of the zodiac, when we contemplate them very deeply, there's something about them that brings our mind and our heart to rest. Truth is like that. This is something that Plato and other ancient astrologers and philosophers said as well. Truth is beautiful and good and true all at once. And so when you find something to meditate on or to contemplate that is true and beautiful and good, it is as though it brings us to rest. We're always in motion, we're always moving, and it brings us to rest. Just very similarly, one of the opening verses of the Yoga Sutras says, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which essentially means yoga is the cessation of the constant revolutions or turnings of the mind. And the word Chitta Vritti has the word Vrit, especially the VRT, is associated. There's etymological connections with that word in Sanskrit to the revolutions of the sky. And so there is a way in which astrology is always helping us as a meditative or contemplative language to bring our mind and our hearts to rest within the constant motion. And that's also basically a description of samadhi, according to Patanjali, that samadhi is like finding the still center at the middle of the wheel, the open still center that as it's always there as the wheels are always turning. So similarly, there's something about the image of every sign in the zodiac that is, if we sit with it and contemplate it, brings our heart and our soul and our mind to rest, because there's truth, beauty, and goodness in the center of these archetypes. And it's a mandala, so it's filled with moving archetypes because life is moving. So we always have to find, we have to be in the practice of moving with the changes and being able to find that resting place within them. So every sign gives us that. And the two fish are a great example, because here we have two fish eternally bound by a string connecting them. One moving towards transcendence, the other one down into the world of fluctuation and change and impermanence and embodiment as well. So when you think about Pisces, that's one level that you can start with. It's as though whether you're a Pisces sun or a Pisces rising, or you have prominent Piscean, planets or energies in your chart, that there's a sense in which you can either find some way of sanctifying that contradiction, so that it becomes a sacred paradox rather than a torturing contradiction, or you can sort of be torn apart by it. And what is the contradiction? It's the contradiction is that I am a spirit soul. I'm seeking rest. I'm seeking home. I'm seeking love. I'm seeking. It's like your phone that's always looking for a signal. It's like, or you turn on my Bluetooth headphones. I go walking with my dog. I turn on the Bluetooth headphones and it goes, ready to pair. It says ready to pair. And I always think, when I hear that, I always think, yeah, me too. Like, me too, my heart too. I'm ready to pair. I'm ready to link. I'm ready for yoga. And we have to find a signal. And we live with that all the time. We live with that while everything is always changing, and we're burning in those changes all the time. So Pisces is either reflective of the life that is lived in some kind of fluid communion, or it is the life that is lived sort of the tortured dreamer. The grass is always greener on the other side, and I can't ever get comfortable. Nothing is ever good enough. I feel sort of tortured or restless. And those qualities are particularly emotional in the double-bodied water sign of Pisces. And but remember, this sign takes place just before the spring equinox, when the light is about to return and take over for the year within the metaphorical language of light and dark that the zodiac is based upon in the solar year. All of it is archetypal. I tell people all the time, don't take it too literally. The same language it doesn't need to be, like, people in the southern hemisphere does not need to be literally configured to you. But I've also seen people flip the zodiac and it's just fine. This is a divinatory language. So the seasonal metaphors, the exchanges of light and dark that they're built upon, are metaphorical. And the whole language is a symbolic form of divination. So I just say that because I know once we start talking about the seasonal metaphors, everyone's like, but it's opposite here down south. It's like, yes, of course it is. The literal connection is not what's important. The symbolic one is what's important. And, I've had that debate more times than I can count on this channel now, so won't get into it again. But in this time of year, in the exchange of light and dark that is the zodiac, you have the light ready to take over. So you have the sign of Pisces is the sign that emerges from the yin into the yang, or from the dark into the light. And the cusp of that movement is one of the tension between the lingering darkness and the desire for light on the other side of the equinox boundary is part of the same metaphor. We're caught up in the darkness of impermanence, of nescience, of avidya, meaning like avidya, like I can't see what's real, versus vidya, which is like I can see. Like, so avidya is like ignorance. I'm caught up in it. I feel pain. I feel dissatisfied. I feel divine discontent. And yeah, but the light is over there. The light is over there, right? So that is acutely felt at the time of year when the light is about to take over, but it has not yet taken over, right? So there's this futuring, this longing that's built into the sign. And remember that just like Sagittarius, this is a Jupiter ruled sign in the ancient language. And so the takeover of light from darkness is also happening in Sagittarius. When Sagittarius concludes, the light starts to return. When Pisces concludes, the light takes over. Contrast that to their opposite sides, Gemini and Virgo, who are Mercury ruled signs. Mercury tends to be more deconstructive, takes things apart, throws them up in the air, calls things into question. And what happens in Gemini, at the end of Gemini, the light starts to decrease, and we go back down towards the darkness, downward and westward, like the one fish of Pisces. In Virgo, after the end of Virgo, the darkness takes over. So Mercury hands over to darkness, Jupiter hands over to light. Now they're not good or bad, just it's not as simple as good and evil, right? So don't think about light and dark that way. That's the ancient astrologers were much more sophisticated than that. And light and dark and masculine and feminine were also not limited in the ancient language to even sex or gender. They were far more, much more like the metaphysical categories of yin and yang. They were thought to be like fundamental building blocks, that the sort of binary, like computers have like binary code language. They're sort of like the binary language of reality. But through those binary languages, also there was also a spectrum. And you have planets like Mercury that represent the deconstruction of the binary, or the ability to move freely between it and not be identified with either side of a binary, which the ancient astrologers also said that the soul itself was not associated with a duality. So the soul itself is moving through constant fluctuations between opposites. And there's all different kinds of opposites and different ways in which opposites interact with each other. And that was all part of their philosophy. So why am I saying this? Because the takeover from dark to light can be experienced in many different ways, and not purely in terms of going from something bad towards something good. For example, many times people who think the good is in the future and the bad is in the present, right? It's bad now, I want it to get better later. Oftentimes, on a very simple level, that kind of thinking will keep us chained perpetually to dissatisfaction with the present, and futuring about a good that will never arrive. So how good is that, right? On the other hand, sometimes it is true that in the present things are not so good, and in the future they will get better. Every spiritual practice is based on the premise that there's something unsatisfactory about just living totally self-absorbed, indulgent, materialistic lifestyles. And so we take up spiritual practice because we believe that things can feel better, right? And there's a way in which we're going to have to include some kind of linear thinking about a better future in that, even if as we progress in spiritual life, things become increasingly non-linear, but still there's a sense in which, things can and will and do get better when we do what we know we need to, when we invest our energy in the right ways and in the right people and the right practices and the right association. We look toward a brighter future when we do that. So the play on light and dark, the play on the moving toward a brighter future. Sometimes people who are constantly dissatisfied with the present and want to move to a better future are those that are going to get torn apart by not only kind of wishful utopian futuring, but also, escapism. Oh, the present sucks, so I better escape it. And the light at the end of the tunnel could be a heroin needle, or it could be alcohol. So sometimes you're going to see addiction associated, or escapism and things like that sort of associated with Pisces. Is not always fair because it's not always like that. And other times you're going to see this sense of the hopeful, buoyant, optimistic, sagely characters with deep emotional intelligence, like that can be Pisces as well. But at any rate, I don't have a lot more to say about Pisces, just that if you meditate on the upward and eastward moving fish and the downward and westward moving fish, and note the tension inherent within that, and how it plays out in your own life in the weeks ahead, in the months ahead, with Jupiter about to enter Pisces as well, which we'll do some more videos on. Um, you can find that by purely by meditating on the image of the two fish and on this archetypal transition between dark and light, in both the potentially beneficial and potentially more destructive elements of this archetype, you'll find that your mind comes to rest. You'll find that your heart comes to rest, and that it's not easy. It's not as easy to get caught up in the archetypes, when you're meditating on them. And that's exactly what ancient astrologers wanted us to be aware of. Like, if you're not contemplating these archetypes, if you're not learning to see the beauty, truth, and eternal goodness of these different seasons of life while you're in them, you'll get played by them. You'll get swept along by them, and because you get overly identified. So, as the sun is moving into Pisces, I hope that this little meditation, was helpful for you, and that it helps you to move along more mindfully with this Pisces season. I would love to hear your thoughts about being a Pisces, what you've noticed about Pisces energy. Free from stereotypes, please. But what are some of the deeper, archetypal dimensions of Pisces that you've learned about? I'd love to hear from you guys. So I hope you guys have an absolutely great weekend, and we will be back together again on Monday for lots more next week. All right, take it easy, everyone. Bye.